the very least, you want to talk about your time horizon, your goals, and then getting into the numbers, how you're going to execute that, what percent in funds, and then monitoring it, which is certainly the shortfall I see with do-it-yourself investors. Maybe they'll put together an investor policy statement, maybe they'll invest in the funds, but then rebalancing is something that is exceedingly rare. I see folks that are rebalancing in a timely manner and doing so properly, which is why I love keeping that investment piece as simple as possible. All-in-one funds take care of the monitoring for you, because I just mentioned, a lot of folks miss the mark when it comes to monitoring their investment portfolio, especially if it's on the more complicated side.
So you're trying to tell me that VTSAX and chill and forgetting to rebalance is not something that the community should adhere to, and you're a proponent for sort of the target date fund and chill?
Target date fund and chill can be a great way to go for a lot of folks. So what is nice about the VTSAX and chill is that it doesn't need any implementation. It doesn't need any monitoring, assuming we're okay with taking the complete wrong amount of risk for our investing plan, right? All-in-one funds, you can take the right amount of risk, and it can also be zero maintenance, which is why I love these things so much. Rick Ferry has a quote that the journey of an index fund investor born into darkness learns about index funds, overcomplicates everything, embraces simplicity. Right? If you haven't gotten to that last step, embrace simplicity, consider that you might, right? And then so consider, are you setting up a lot of work for a future self who's not really going to be into spreadsheets anymore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? I think about one gentleman I work with, had a manager, learned about low-cost index funds, fired the manager, and then created his own 10-fund portfolio, right? And then a year went by and he worked with me for the first time. And he said to me, and I'll never forget this, I regret making my portfolio so complicated. And that's been a pretty common theme in the folks that I work with, regretting the complexity of their existing investments.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hey, Jackie, guess what? It's Plutus Awards season, but our audience won't know what the Plutus Awards are. What are they?
Yay, woohoo! We are excited that we are in the running for several different categories for the Plutus Awards. And the Plutus Awards basically is given important recognition to independent content creators in the financial space. It's been around for 10 plus years at least, right? I can't exactly remember how long, but anytime I saw that a content creator won a Plutus Award, that was a big deal. And it demonstrated that they were great in what they were doing in terms of the financial space as an independent creator.
Yeah, I mean, this would mean the world to us if you would consider going on to the website plutus.awardsplatform.com. That's plutus.awardsplatform, one word, .com. We're up for about 7 categories, Jackie, and one we're really proud of is the best new personal finance content creator audio. Now, we started 2 years ago. We've had over 1 million downloads, but we're still allowed, because of a miss last year, to be up for this new content creator award. It would mean the world to us if you would consider voting in this category.
Yeah. And like you said, even though it's been 2 years, we're still considered new. We've got podcasts that's been out there for 10 plus years, and they've gotten really good at it. So we're proud to be still considered being in the best new personal finance content. Now, also, we've got several other categories, and one of those is Content Creator of the Year audio. So this is another great one that we believe we're deserving of it. And if you think that we deserve that and you want to do a little give back, we would love it if you would nominate us for that category as well.
Yeah, and there's People Choice Awards as well, and we're up for the one for audio.
Yeah, and then we've got the Plutus Storyteller Award. Bill, we have some great storytelling on this show that are from the voice of late starters. And then you and I have shared our own story as well as Becky. So the Storyteller Award definitely spoke to me. So I wanted to make sure, I was so glad to have us on the list for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, your stories are a pivotal part of the show. We late starters are here together to learn from each other, and your stories are critical to get out there to the financial independence community. Another category that we're up for is Best Traditional Retirement Content. We do give hardcore information. It isn't all softcore. We are also hardcore.
Yeah, not only that, Bill, but a lot of us that are getting a late start maybe a little bit older, where we are planning for traditional retirement. We all want to reach financial independence, but when it comes to the retirement piece, perhaps we are in those traditional retirement ages. So we talk about things like Social Security. We've had something about Medicare. We've had a lot of CFPs and other financial professionals that are talking about even the traditional part of it. So this was a great category to be a part of as well. Another one is one that's close to my heart, is Best Personal Finance Content for Women. Our audience is 70+% women, and we have a lot of shows dedicated to that. We just recently had Carrie Carbonaro. I did a Women in Taxes webinar that I cross-pollinated to our platform, but speaking to women is a big part of our show and what we like to bring in.
Yeah, and lastly in these categories, we're up for Best Personal Finance Content for Underserved Communities. We feel that the late starters are an underserved community. We are probably the only voice in the podcast world out there speaking to you, the catching up to fires, the late starters. This is a new thing for us, and we hope that you feel that you're being served.
Yeah, and if you think that, please support us in this way. We don't ask for much, and we certainly appreciate you tuning in every single Sunday and occasionally on Wednesdays. And if you think it's worthy of other people finding the show, please take the time to do it. I think there's a quick little registration, but you can get through it in 5 minutes. So if we could have 5 minutes of your time to do that, we would be so grateful. And Bill, I also have the book Fire for Dummies and a little bit of my own platform. So I'm in the running as well for a few things, not competing with Catching Up to Five, but one of my favorite. So if you want to support me as well, I'm under the Best New Personal Finance Content Creator written for Fire for Dummies. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, also the Best New Personal Finance Book. And we all think that's the case. Fire for Dummies for life.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I've shared a lot of the content from the book on the show, of course, but also I'm in the running for Best Financial Advisor Content. I am a CFP professional, so I got into that category. And then there's something called the Plutus Resilience Award. And I'm not sure if this is a new category or not, but this definitely spoke to me. I've openly shared my story to, get it out there, and hopefully it impacts other people or inspires other people by sharing my mistakes and things like that and how I bounce back. So resilience is a very important term for me, term of endearment, really. And then the last one, Bill, is Best Financial Independence Retire Early Content for Fire for Dummies. I literally wrote the book on financial independence and retire early. So that's the last one that I'm in. So for both Catching Up to Five and my book, we would love for you to take a minute and vote for these. Again, it's at plutus.awardsplatform.com. It has a quick little registration. You can be done in 5 minutes.
Yeah, you'll see this link in our newsletter. You'll see it in our show notes. And we just hope you feel as we do that we put out some stuff that is worth listening to.
Now, Jon, I do have a question on behalf of someone in our Facebook group. They were specifically asking about long-term care, and I guess long-term care insurance is what people usually mean. What are your thoughts around that? Let's say she's in 40s, 50s, something like that, and she's trying to figure out, how should I be looking at long-term care insurance? What is the best strategy to get started? Kind of making sure that she has provided for proper provisions when it comes to that.
Yeah. And one postscript to your comment about tax advantage accounts not applying for a wash sale considerations. If you sell an investment at a loss in a taxable account and you buy it back in a tax advantage account, you're also not right. IRS is also going to say, hey, you can't do that because you still have the same investment exposure. Long-term care, I touched on earlier in going over the topic areas that I review with folks. The big thing I look at is how well funded are you for retirement? So that's to say, if you got more money you can possibly spend, you got millions of bucks, it's pretty hard to make a case for long-term care. But if you're on the fence and your plan's not looking very robust, then long-term care might be a valuable risk management tool for you. Now, there's other considerations that are going to show up when looking at someone's big financial picture. Another example is going to be, are we investing appropriately, right? So let's say you are well funded for retirement, but your investments are a mess. And that can be the case for some do-it-yourselfers that I work with. And maybe a mess means I've got a bunch of legacy investments that I'm refusing to sell for tax purposes, or maybe I'm taking too much or too little risk, right? So if your investment portfolio isn't on point, as inefficient as it sounds at that point, a long-term care insurance policy can help manage your risk in that scenario because you have more risk from your investment portfolio. How do you balance that risk somewhere else? This insurance can balance the risk in that situation. Now, again, that's pretty inefficient. I wouldn't recommend that. Ideally, you have the right portfolio, and then we're better able to self-fund for long-term care. Bad news about long-term care, it's going to be expensive. You really do get what you pay for here. It doesn't make sense to buy a tiny policy with a small benefit because then you can self-fund for that amount. And it is going to be a quote-unquote bad deal. All insurance is. If it wasn't, the insurance company wouldn't exist. We're not buying insurance to win one over on the insurance company. We're buying insurance to manage a risk. And again, for some folks, long-term care insurance can be an important part of managing risk to their retirement plan. Now, ideally, absent any health conditions, you want a plain vanilla long-term care insurance policy, one where you pay the annual premiums regularly. Ideally, if you can qualify for that traditional policy, you probably don't want a hybrid policy that combines long-term care insurance with another type of insurance product like life insurance or an annuity. You want to buy one product that does one thing well as opposed to another product that does two things poorly. But again, depending on health conditions, some folks might not be able to qualify for the pure traditional long-term insurance product. And at that point, that hybrid policy might be their only option. Now, a lot of folks sometimes are saddled with these weird complicated insurance products that some insurance salesmen sold them in the past. So they already have a whole life insurance policy, or they already have some sort of IUL or some weird thing. Maybe in that situation, it makes sense to convert that to some other insurance product that does have a long-term care insurance rider. It depends upon your situation on the policy, et cetera. So a few options for folks to consider when shopping for long-term care insurance, figuring out if it's right for them.
Yeah, and when they're shopping for it, where is the best place to start? The long-term care insurance industry is broken. They can't get it right. When they first started 20 so years ago, there's been so many changes. They underestimated what the payouts would be. So a lot of us are so cautious when it comes to even buying long-term care insurance. Like, where should they start in evaluating policies and figuring out what makes sense for them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's insurance that you're going to lose. That's the way it works. Again, if that wasn't the case, the insurance company wouldn't exist. You buy an insurance policy, you're probably going to come out behind the insurance company with respect to dollars going in, dollars coming out, investment return on those dollars, et cetera. Again, we're not buying insurance because we're going to beat the insurance company at the game. We're buying insurance to help us manage a particular risk. Now, in the past, the insurance companies got the numbers wrong on long-term care insurance. So actually in the past, you were able to win one over on the insurance company. Now that ship has sailed and there was an exception to the rule. It doesn't mean long-term care insurance can't be a valuable tool for managing risk. So AALTCI.org, LTCtreat.com, PrepSmart.com. These are a few places you can shop for long-term care insurance. Now, in shopping for policies, consider that you get what you pay for. A policy that's going to have a lower price relative to the benefit provided. Don't think there's not a catch. There's going to be a catch. And the catch is that insurance company is stretching itself financially to provide that higher benefit for a lower amount that you're giving them in exchange for a premium. So I wouldn't necessarily go for the cheapest. Rather, you might consider doing the opposite, because that means the insurance company is going to be more financially solvent. Better ensuring the insurance company is going to be around by the time you need to claim benefits.
I feel like me and Bill are right around that age where we probably should be looking for long-term care insurance. What age do you usually recommend your clients start looking at long-term care insurance?
Yeah, rule of thumb is age 50 to 60 is when you're going to start looking at these policies. The catch with that approach is that if you get some sort of health condition that precludes you from being able to purchase long-term care insurance at age 49, well, then you're out of luck at that point. So yes, you can buy it late. You can make the decision to buy it later, but there is some risk with that approach. So bear that in mind in making the decision to buy long-term care insurance later. You might not be able to in the event of a health condition.
Good point. I have not purchased it yet. Bill, have you already purchased or looked at purchasing a long-term care insurance policy?
No, we're planning on self-insuring, and there are other ways to do it. We have the assets to do it. You talk about needing a policy of $500,000 each in order to be able to make it viable given today's cost. Is that correct?
You certainly want to buy a policy that is a meaningful amount of benefit coverage, right? So don't go buy a $50,000 benefit policy, because most folks, at least the folks that I work with, are able to self-fund for $50,000. If you're feeling tight with your purse strings and you don't want to spend the money, I wouldn't buy something little. If you're only going to buy something little, it might make sense not to bother at all. You want to buy a meaningful amount of coverage, one that's going to provide a substantial benefit. I can tell you, long-term care expenses are not cheap. I can think of one family I work with. It was a couple sisters. They were working with me to manage the finances of their father. Father was in assisted living. His cost for assisted living per year was $300,000 a year. Now, that is certainly the highest I've ever seen. On average, you are looking 5 figures per month, though. $10,000, $12,000 for assisted living. That's what care costs nowadays. And unfortunately, historically, the rate that has increased over time has been more than general inflation.
Yeah, thank you for stepping us through that. I thought it was a great question in the Facebook group. And I'm like, hey, we got Jon Luskin. He's a CFP and he knows this stuff. So she's going to really appreciate that you address this. And that's something I need to be thinking about myself.
Well, these are all the pieces we have to put together with you before we even begin to talk about an investor policy statement. And we've mentioned this before. What generally are the components when you get down to the math, the money, the investments? What generally are the components of an investor policy statement that our audience should be looking at?
So first, I'll say that the investor policy statement is certainly, all else being equal, something that's going to be maybe a little bit more for those folks who really like to get geeky with their investments. Gosh, I mean, I could certainly argue if you kept your investments ultra simple, you could probably make the investor policy statement process a lot easier. But if you're going to nerd out on your investments, which again, a lot of do-it-yourselfers like to do, we all like our spreadsheets, etc., there's a lot of topic areas to cover in the investor policy statement. But at the very least, you want to talk about your time horizon, your goals, and then getting into the numbers, how you're going to execute that, what percent in funds, and then monitoring it, which is certainly the shortfall I see with do-it-yourself investors. Maybe they'll put together an investor policy statement, maybe they'll invest in the funds, but then rebalancing is something that is exceedingly rare. I see folks that are rebalancing in a timely manner and doing so properly, which is why I love keeping that investment piece as simple as possible. All-in-one funds take care of the monitoring for you, because I just mentioned a lot of folks miss the mark when it comes to monitoring their investment portfolio, especially if it's on the more complicated side, especially if they are really super investment nerds, especially if they're tax sensitive, especially maybe if they have a life and they're busy, if they're not a retiree with ample time on their hands, etc. So broken record warning, keeping that investment piece ultra simple, really the way to go. All-in-one funds can be an absolute great way to do that.
So you're trying to tell me that VTSAX and chill and forgetting to rebalance is not something that the community should adhere to, and you're a proponent for sort of the target date fund and chill?
Target date fund and chill can be a great way to go for a lot of folks. So what is nice about the VTSAX and chill is that it doesn't need any implementation. It doesn't need any monitoring, assuming we're okay with taking the complete wrong amount of risk for our investing plan, right? All-in-one funds, you can take the right amount of risk, and it can also be zero maintenance, which is why I love these things so much. It's just as much work as a VT, SAX, and chill strategy, but we're better diversified, and we're always taking the right amount of risk for our particular plan by using, be it a target date fund for some folks, maybe a target date ETF if we're dealing with a taxable account, or maybe allocation ETFs or life strategy funds. It depends upon what your circumstances are. There's a lot of different all-in-one funds to choose from. Whatever your situation is, there's probably an all-in-one fund out there that's right for you. And with it requiring zero maintenance, it can be a really good solution for almost everyone.
So, John, when you're saying all-in-one funds, is that pretty much the same thing as a target date fund?
Yeah, so I'd say all-in-one funds fall into two categories. Target date funds is one type of all-in-one fund. The other type of all-in-one fund is going to be something like an allocation ETF or a life strategy fund, where it's like a target date fund in that we've got US stocks, we've got international stocks, we've got US bonds, we have international bonds. But instead of changing your stock bond mix over time, it's going to be a fixed mix, right? Maybe it's going to be a 60-40 portfolio, and it's going to be a 60-40 portfolio today until the end of time. Or maybe there's going to be a 40-60, the inverse, or maybe a 20-80, or maybe an 80-20, or maybe even a 100% stock portfolio for folks. That might be an appropriate option at that point in their life, given perhaps more retirement income than they can ever possibly spend, for example.
So which flavor are we typically seeing in like a 401k or the employer sponsored plan? I seem to see the target dates more often than necessarily the other type you mentioned.
It's rare that I see something like a life strategy fund. I have seen the Vanguard Balance Fund a few times in a workplace 401k. Now, the Vanguard Balance Fund, not my first pick because it's missing international, so it's not ideal for that reason. And then there are target retirement income funds, which are fixed portfolio stock bond mix. Usually they're too conservative for most folks. And that's also a challenge with target date funds generally as well. As you get closer to that target year, they might be too conservative for some folks. So if you're in retirement or near retirement, you may be better off with a static fund, something like a 60-40 that you'll have forever. That might be a better choice than a target date fund, which might just continue to get too aggressive, too conservative for most folks' situations.
Okay. And I think this is something that's true, but I want to get your confirmation on it. So we know that a lot of employers are auto enrolling their new employees into the 401k or the employer sponsored retirement plan. Are they typically defaulting to a target date fund when they do the auto enrollment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It almost certainly makes sense for that situation, because if we're not in retirement, a target date fund can almost certainly be a really good solution for most folks. Now, if we're retired, those funds might be too conservative, depends on the fund, depends on your situation. But if we're still working, we're still earning, defaulting to a low cost target date fund would be unusual if that wasn't the best option for most folks.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing. I think it's probably been over a decade ago, but they would put them in the most conservative thing, which wasn't always that great. If you're 28 and they're putting you in something conservative, it's like, ouch. So it feels like it's an improvement that they are defaulting you to a target date retirement fund. So if we had to ask you your thumbs up on all-in-one funds and target date retirement funds, right? Because we get a big debate on this, people on one side or the other.
The simplicity principle is ascribed to here. I mean, and there's lots of other reasons other than just keep it simple, avoid the need to rebalance it, have your own glide path built in. There's also sort of psychobehavioral reasons to do this as well. As we get older, it becomes maybe harder to manage our portfolio and there's cognitive decline. Isn't that another reason to consider this?
Oh gosh, absolutely. I think about someone I work with, and it was less than a decade ago. They were reading articles on the internet about the latest cool biotech company putting money into it in their Ally Invest account. And a few years later, that same person is in memory care. They can't even turn on a computer, right? And so if your investing plan is me picking hot stocks or even rebalancing your portfolio, doesn't make sense if your investment timeline, which is effectively your life, it doesn't make sense for your ability to manage that plan fall short of your lifespan. I would argue no, right? So that's another benefit of having these all-in-one funds. They're no maintenance. And cognitive impairment isn't the only consideration. It's also just enthusiasm. Rick Ferry has a quote that the journey of an index fund investor born into darkness learns about index funds, overcomplicates everything, embraces simplicity, right? If you haven't gotten to that last step, embrace simplicity, consider that you might, right? And then so consider, are you setting up a lot of work for a future self who's not really going to be into spreadsheets anymore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? I think about one gentleman I work with, had a manager, learned about low-cost index funds, fired the manager, and then created his own 10-fund portfolio, right? And then a year went by and he worked with me for the first time. And he said to me, I'll never forget this, I regret making my portfolio so complicated. And that's been a pretty common theme in the folks that I work with, regretting the complexity of their existing investments. But I have never had anyone, I've worked with over 400 households, I've never had anyone ever say to me, I regret making my investments so simple.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of guilty of that, but I am also following that journey of an index investor that Ferry talked about, because I guess you could say I'm losing my enthusiasm a little bit, but I'm definitely moving towards the line that hits simplicity, because I have a daughter that will probably take over all of this and she is not into it. So when you have an investor policy statement, it sounds like it's also a good thing in preparation for whether it's cognitive decline or whoever might be looking at your investments or helping you with your investments past the time that you can actually deal with it and do it yourself. Now, I'm assuming you're still alive when you're doing this, but it seems like that's a good thing as well, because my daughter wouldn't really know what to do, and maybe Bill's wife wouldn't know what to do. But if I had a policy statement, is that helpful?
It can be. It also depends upon what's the philosophy of the investment policy statement. Is it, hey, I'm going to use the target date fund and I'm going to forget about it? If so, that can be pretty good. But if it's going to be, I'm going to wait until my small cap value allocation gets out of alignment by 5%, at that point, it'll trigger a rebalance. I mean, that's not going to be great for that non-interested spouse, right? And that non-interested spouse is an exceedingly common situation, right? So as mentioned, I do these 2-hour phone calls with folks. Sometimes I only get one spouse, sometimes I get both. But if I do get both, it's certainly obvious that we've got one spreadsheet nerd and then we have the more normal spouse, right? And so I have to think about, to your point about legacy planning, what investments are you leaving for your daughter? What investments are you leaving for your spouse? Is it going to be where they've got to pull up the investment policy statement and pull up your own proprietary spreadsheet that only you know how it works because you've created it, and maybe you made your spouse sit through it once, but they couldn't care less about it because it's not interesting? Is that the sort of investment plan you're going to be leaving them? Or is it going to be a fund that needs zero maintenance on their part? Consider just how difficult it is managing someone's estate, or even in the situation of their cognitive impairment. Attorney in fact is the person you appoint powers in your financial power of attorney document. So you say, hey, I trust this person to manage my money when I'm no longer able to, when I have cognitive impairment. That person, they're called your attorney in fact. So I'm the attorney in fact for a family member. They have dementia, and I had to go figure out where everything was because they didn't create an emergency letter, right? That resource that we talked about earlier. So imagine now someone, they've got to go figure out where all your accounts are, rifle through the stack of papers on your desk, figure out what your passwords are, try to negotiate physically moving a person with dementia into an assisted living facility, right? Manage that process. So you've got to do all of that, redirect Social Security check payments. You've got to do all that. And now you've got to go pull up their IPS and follow the rules and figure out their spreadsheet. I mean, it almost seems cruel to add that to the list of to-dos to the person that you've entrusted to manage your money for your own welfare. So legacy planning, huge reason to keep that investing piece simple. And here's one more thing I'll add to that, is that if you're really set on your micromanaging investing minutia plan, go ask your spouse, hey, honey, would you rather I put our investments in this one fund that requires you do absolutely nothing except maybe when you need money to sell some shares? Or would you rather that you've got to open up my spreadsheet, read my investment policy statement, do the trade order calculations when it's 4th of September each year, right? Ask them what they prefer, and then let that answer guide how you're going to structure your investments going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful statement. And people have worried too that these target date funds or life strategy funds aren't necessarily so good on the taxable side because of the bonds they hold. But you have a solution for that too, right?
Insofar as the bonds they hold, they generate income taxable at the marginal rate. And so that's a little bit separate from the target date fund issue. But yeah, if you're with a target date fund, or rather, if we're talking about a taxable account, maybe a target date ETF, that's going to be a little more tax efficient. That's not going to necessarily defer your marginal income. So this is a tax asset allocation or tax location issue. Michael Kitts, again, does a great job debunking this rule of thumb, right? And the rule of thumb is, hey, if you have bonds in a taxable account, whether it's a bond fund or whether it's bonds that are generating income as part of a larger on-one fund, then you'll have so much taxable income at the marginal rate that you'll die a slow death of taxes, right? No, it's cardinal sin to hold bonds in your taxable account because it's so tax inefficient, it'll be the worst thing in the world. Now, that assumption, or rather that guideline, is correct if we make two assumptions. First assumption is you're going to die this year, therefore you have a short investment timeline. And number two, all you care about are taxes and not the ultimate wealth that you have. And the latter being a much bigger number because your taxes are always going to be a fraction of what your wealth is. So that's to say, if you want to be a real nerd about it, you really want to look at the numbers, and again, perhaps you guys can link to the Michael Kitts blog post on this, then actually you might want to have bonds in your taxable account because that leaves space in your tax advantage accounts to hold stocks. Why would you want to hold stocks in your tax advantage accounts if they don't necessarily spit out marginal income? Because stocks, on average, at least historically, they grow more than bonds. So we want to put the higher growing asset in the tax advantage account because stocks, as tax efficient as they are, they do still spit out some dividend income that is taxable, that is a tax drag. So that's just a little bit of debunking of the rule of thumb. Hey, you don't want to hold bonds in a taxable account. I would not worry about that because what strategy is ultimately going to provide more wealth over your lifetime? Bonds and taxable versus bonds and tax deferred. We're not going to know until we know how long you're going to live, what your investment returns are going to be on stocks versus bonds, what future tax rates are going to be, what the yield distributions are going to be on stocks versus bonds. And so only if you make really specific assumptions and you're right about that, a short investment timeline, et cetera, then yeah, sure, maybe you don't have bonds in a taxable account. But short of that, it's just one of those investment complexities that require a lot of guesses about the future, which is always silly. These that require a lot of guesses about the future, just not something that I would worry about.
Yeah. So, John, I got to ask you about this. So, as you know, this year we've been challenged with some crazy stock market swings. We had that Liberation Day that the market dropped like a rock in just 2 days. So, is there a place in the investor statement policy that talks about what they're going to do when the market drops? Because it almost seems like all that goes out the window when you really see it and you're like holding your heart like, oh no. So how do you advise your clients when it comes to these severe market drops like we've seen this year?
I always tell folks that this index fund buy and hold strategy only works if you can stick with it. And so if this isn't something that you're committed to for the long term, if market movements scare you, if you're scared of investment losses in the short term, you don't want to do the strategy because it's not going to work. This is only going to work if you have that iron stomach. And so in that situation, market drops, great financial crisis, coronavirus crash, Liberation Day, whatever, you're going to do practically nothing right now. Maybe if you've got the more complicated portfolio where you've got a lot of funds in there, and if you want to, or it makes sense for you, maybe at that point it makes sense to rebalance. Or if you've got an all-in-one fund, it's going to rebalance for you, which is, again, why those all-in-one funds are absolutely fantastic. But I always tell folks, and I'm not sure if I had it in the sample write-ups, but at least in the write-ups that I have now, I've got it in bold highlighted text. You will have losses. It's a normal part of the investing process. You can expect losses, and you can have that in bonds too, not just stocks. If you hate that idea, you don't want to use a strategy because it's not going to work. Thereafter, I always tell folks, best way to make that happen is don't look at it. And that's another great reason of all-in-one funds. You don't even need to look at it. Since you don't have to rebalance it, I mean, there's no reason to ever look at these things. Now, if you're doing the more complicated approach, then you're looking at it because you might need to rebalance, and that adds in that human element that Bill touched on, which is always going to get in the way when it comes to investing success. I talked to one do-it-yourselfer I worked with recently. He said he had a lot of success deleting the various custodial apps off his phone, right? It helped him not look at it. So turn off the news, don't log into your accounts, leave it alone. And that's a lot easier to do when you have these all-in-one funds, right? Because you don't even have an excuse to look at it to rebalance. It makes that investing piece really simple.
So would you have anything like this specifically written, like a paragraph written into the investor policy statement? Or I know that it's assumed in a lot of different areas, like the investment part and your allocation, but I almost feel like it's just so easy to veer from that. So do you specifically write in or suggest that people write in a section to talk about market drops?
Yeah, great question. Certainly, I think if someone needs that or wants that, great. All IPSs are going to say, hey, this is a long-term strategy. So there's a little bit of that that's implied in there. But if you want to put in additional info about, hey, this is for the long term, the investment market, since we have the all-in-one fund, we're going to do absolutely nothing. Great. I think that would be quite a reasonable way to go.
Yeah, I've become more and more of an advocate for simplicity over complexity. I'm kind of that investor that has migrated from the 10 funds for life down to the 3 funds portfolio, more or less. And you've made a compelling argument for the target date fund, especially now that I know I can do it on the taxable side as well and make life simple for my wife and kids. So maybe I will get there. I'm not quite there. I still enjoy it and I still fiddle, probably too much at times, and I don't dare to be dull. My sister, who checked the box aggressive investor when she became a professor at Emory 20 years ago, even though it wasn't in a target date fund, it was in a very sort of complex self-styled portfolio for aggressive based on that institution. She just checked the box. 20 years later, she woke up and decided she wanted to learn about finances and dig into it, looked under the hood and realized, oh my God, the best decision I ever made was to not look at this for 20 years. And now she wants to fiddle and she doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, I think, Bill, I think both you and I are very guilty of loving this stuff. We are podcast co-hosts on a financial podcast, but I think that we are both moving towards that journey to simplicity. Like you just consolidated a bunch of your accounts to one broker, right? Or primarily one broker. I've been ratcheting down. I have an individual stock portfolio, so I've been simplifying that. Eventually, I may even just get rid of that. But also, I have one go-to fund that I use. I don't need to look at 20 funds every time I need to get into a stock index fund or whatever. So we are working on it, Jon.
Wonderful.
It seems like you're an evolved human being, an involved investor, an involved advisor. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. I look forward to seeing your talk on the all-in-one funds at Bogleheads this year. I believe you're giving a talk on that. Thank you for helping us promote the Bogleheads initiative in the Jonathan Clements domain, as well as in general with regards to financial literacy and education. We'll put links to all of these things we've talked about today on the show notes. And we look forward to having you back as individual issues that may be too complex for us need to be simplified, Jon. Thank you for being with us here on Catching Up to Fi.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And Jon, I guess one last quick thing. We obviously cater to late starters. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask. You see a lot of clients. So that's why I'm so interested in your perspective. Anything unique to late starters? Late starters would be people that maybe they wake up in their 30s and their 40s. They haven't done any investing. And they're like, oh my God, I am way behind. How do I catch up? Typically, Bill and I see that they want to, like you mentioned, immediately go to investments. But anything in particular for late starters?
Yeah, great question. With respect to target date funds, probably want to consider a target date ETF in a taxable account. You'll have some tax efficiency considerations with mutual funds and the taxable accounts. ETF can be possibly a better solution if we're talking about investing dollars in a taxable account. With respect to late starters, certainly, just like anyone else, there's going to be the desire to optimize investments. I don't think that's where the value add is. It's strictly just going to be a math issue. It's just saving more, spending less. You still want to be thinking about managing your risks. If you're a late starter, probably means you need to be more serious about long-term care insurance and how that can manage your risk. If you need a lot of your working years to help you shore up your retirement savings, then all the more reason to make sure that you do have high quality disability insurance, because if you can't work, then your plan doesn't work. So disability insurance is still going to be a valuable tool in that situation. Life insurance, if you have dependents as well. So pretty much all the same things, all the super boring, but what I like to call important and urgent projects, equally critical, if not more so. Always caution folks that workplace long-term disability insurance policy, really not great, really has a lot of weaknesses. That means you've got to go out and you've got to buy a very expensive private disability insurance, right? So if you're a late starter, it means you're older in age, which means that disability insurance is going to be more expensive, life insurance too. It's something that I would encourage you not to skimp on. Think about that very thoughtfully, because again, your plan works only if you work and earn money. Disability insurance is one product that helps manage that risk. Unfortunately, these things can be a little complicated. There is a lot of fine print in there that you need to get right when purchasing these policies. To be a real nerd about it, that means an own occupation definition. That's language you want to see: own occupation, regular occupation until age 65. You want an inflation provision, an inflation rider. You want a partial disability provision. I do talk a little bit more about this on a podcast episode we did with a disability insurance agent. I'm not sure if you guys want to link to that or not. That can be a resource for folks. But to echo your point, I would resist the urge to micromanage your investments. It's just not where you're going to make an impact. It's going to be saving more and making sure to manage your risks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jon. I definitely wanted your insight on that. Thank you for sharing that with our late starters. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. This has been so great. We loved having you, and you're invited back anytime. We love brilliant people on our show. And Bill, shall we go ahead and wrap it up?
Yeah, let's just tell our audience that look forward to more good content next week on Catching Up to 5. Thank you, Jon Luskin.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brazard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofy.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to 5. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to 5. Cheers.